I mean, I think from my point of view as Director of Studies and Admissions here, it really makes no difference whether someone's interviewed in person or online. Obviously, we have decades of experience interviewing in person, pre-pandemic. And we have quite a few years now experience of interviewing fully online during the pandemic and post-pandemic. So basically, we know how to do in-person interviews. We know how to do online interviews. And, we're confident that it is a variable that has no significant impact on whether someone receives an offer or not.
Hello everyone, welcome to Cambridge from the Inside. We're here with a returning guest. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yep, I'm still Marcus Tomalin, and I'm still the Director of Admissions here at Trinity Hall.
Nice. And we're going to be talking about a topic that might not be relevant forever, but it definitely is relevant right now in 2025 September. We're talking about interview format, online interviews and in-person interviews, and what colleges are doing, the differences between the two formats, etc. So a lot of things that applicants will be thinking about now with regards to choosing which college to apply to, and maybe thinking about what the interviews will look like. So just for anyone who doesn't know, before we get into interview format, can you explain to us, Marcus, what are Cambridge interviews, and is our interviews something that all universities have for their applicants?
Yeah, so the Cambridge interviews are just part of the admissions process. It's one of the things we use to try and assess the ability and potential of the people who've applied to us. At Cambridge and at Oxford, people are interviewed for the subject they apply for, regardless of what that subject is. So as it were, we interview for all the subjects that we offer. At other universities, it's normally a subset of the subjects that they offer. So many universities, for instance, will have interviews for medicine, but other universities might have interviews for certain subjects. But there are also universities that don't interview people really at all. So it's not a standard part of the university admissions processes across the whole country, but it is a standard part of the processes at both Oxford and Cambridge.
Nice. So let's say talking about before the pandemic, before lockdown, I'm assuming that interviews were always in person at Cambridge?
Yeah, pretty much. So pre-pandemic, the vast majority of the interviews were in person.
Yeah.
That includes some of the interviews for people who applied from overseas.
Okay.
Because we used to have teams of interviewers who went out to certain countries and they would interview people in those countries in person. If someone was unable to be interviewed in person overseas, from about sort of, I'm trying to remember now, sort of 2010, 2011 onwards, we did interview some people online. Back in the day, we used things like Skype, if anyone remembers Skype. And so there were some online interviews even then. But since then, since about sort of 2010, 2011, the number of online interviews has, gradually increased. And obviously during the pandemic and the years when we were all in lockdown and everything, all the interviews were online because there was no way of doing it in person at all.
So if I'm a student and I'm applying to Cambridge for this application year, 2025, will my interview be in person or online?
It will depend which college you end up applying to, basically. So, as I say, during the pandemic, all the Cambridge colleges interviewed everybody online because we had no choice, we couldn't do anything else. Over the last 2 years, 3 years, there's been a gradual shift back to some of the interviews being in person. So for the current year, for people who will be applying for the deadline in October 2025, the situation is that some of the colleges, the majority still are interviewing fully online. There's a large minority of colleges that are interviewing UK-based applicants in person and overseas applicants online. And there's a couple of colleges, I think, that are planning to try to interview everyone in person. So, it's a different situation to the one that applicants will see, for instance, at Oxford, where there was an agreement to stay online for a period of 5 years, and that decision was taken a couple of years ago. And I don't want to try to speak authoritatively about Oxford, because obviously I'm based at Cambridge, but my understanding is that all the interviews at Oxford for this coming admissions round will be fully online. At Cambridge, it's more of a sort of mixed situation, but there is a central website that maybe we can put in the description. That can tell you, just at a glance, which colleges are fully online, which ones are interviewing some people in person, some online, and which ones are fully in person, because we know it's a bit confusing. But if you can see all that information together, it's not too hard to sort of navigate your way through that.
Yeah, we can put a link in the caption below. And as Marcus said, the website clearly states which colleges are interviewing all their applicants online, or which colleges are interviewing them all in person, and which colleges are doing a mixture. Would you, would I be right in saying for the colleges that are interviewing some students in person, some students online, it's once an applicant has chosen a college to apply for, it's best to double check with that college how they're choosing which students to be interviewed online and which students are going to be interviewed in person, because I guess colleges can do that differently.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that information should be on the college's website so that people can see it before they apply. So as I say, in many cases, the colleges that are interviewing some people in person, it will be UK-based applicants in person. But there are, I think, a couple of colleges that are giving applicants the chance to choose whether they want to be interviewed in person, online. So there are some differences even between those colleges that will be doing some in person, some online. But all of that should be clear from the college's website. So people should be able to apply with full information about how that's being handled.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it might sound like obvious advice, but it's whether it's in interviews or anything else, it's normally a good protocol to, once you've chosen a course and chosen a college, to look through that specific college's website in detail if you're considering applying to it.
And even if you've chosen the course and you've got a short list of maybe 3 colleges that you're interested in, it's good to look at those 3 colleges' web pages, and that might help you make your decision. You might think, I don't want to be interviewed in person, and so I'm going to apply for this college that's fully online, or vice versa. So I think when you've got a kind of short list, do some careful reading of the relevant web pages.
And so what are Trinity Hall doing with regards to interview format this year?
So what we're doing this year here at Trinity Hall is we're interviewing UK-based applicants in person and overseas applicants online. I think from my point of view as Director of Studies and Admissions here, it really makes no difference whether someone's interviewed in person or online. Obviously, we have decades of experience interviewing in person, pre-pandemic. And we have quite a few years now experience of interviewing fully online during the pandemic and post-pandemic. So basically, we know how to do in-person interviews. We know how to do online interviews. And, we're confident that it is a variable that has no significant impact on whether someone receives an offer or not. And just in case people are interested, the reason why here at Trinity Hall we will be adopting that approach this year, we simply asked our directors of studies how they would like to handle the interviews for the coming admissions round. and there was a really slim majority in favor of interviewing UK-based applicants in person. But the fact that it was a very slim majority suggests that it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really make a big difference. And if you want to think about those two ways of interviewing people, as I say, from a purely academic perspective of assessing their ability and potential, it makes no difference. We can assess someone's ability and potential in person or online. We've done both of those things, many hundreds, probably thousands of times. So we're confident we can do that. The other considerations in relation to both types of interview, in person or online, basically there are sort of pros and cons. So some potential applicants tell us that they would prefer to be interviewed in person because they'd find it less stressful. Other potential applicants tell us they'd prefer to be interviewed online because they find it less stressful. There are issues to do with transport and traveling to Cambridge. So if someone lives in London, it's pretty easy to get to Cambridge. You just hop on a train for about 50 minutes to an hour and you're kind of there. If you're living in the Hebrides or if you're living in Northern Ireland, you're not just hopping on a train for sort of 50 minutes. It's more expensive and more arduous, the journey to sort of get to Cambridge. Now, some applicants see that as being an enjoyable part of the process, but we're aware that it has significant financial consequences for some people. So what I would say is if someone ends up applying to a college that is interviewing UK-based applicants in person, and if you're applying from a background where finances are really difficult, and obviously we know that we're currently living through a period where a lot of people are struggling financially for all sorts of reasons, then let the college that's assessing your application know that, because they, in almost all cases, they will be able to offer financial support for people who aren't able to travel to Cambridge. And just to sort of finish the comparison, I guess, if you're thinking about online interviews, again, there are pros and cons. I mean, sometimes people look at it and say, well, it would be better to interview everyone online because then there's a sort of uniformity. Everyone gets interviewed in the same way. And at a kind of high level, kind of abstract level, that's true. In practice, that's not always the case, simply because different applicants have access to different types of technology. So if you're interviewing someone online and they've got really great Wi-Fi, it's easier than if you're interviewing someone who you're interviewing online and their Wi-Fi is really flaky. Now, over the years, we've developed ways of making sure they're not at a disadvantage because of that. But it can be more stressful for them, and it can be more stressful for the interviewers because everyone knows that the Wi-Fi isn't really working, and maybe the applicant has to repeat an answer multiple times before the interviewers understand it. And just in terms of a sort of human interaction, that can be quite laborious, and that can make people a little bit stressed. So there are pros and cons, If there was just a single obvious perfect way of interviewing people, I think there'd be no disparity between the colleges. We'd all be doing it in exactly the same way. And the fact that there is some kind of divergence of practice suggests that different colleges are focusing on different strengths and different weaknesses of the format. But at least, I guess it's a good thing. It gives people a choice. People who are applying have a choice, and if they really don't want to be interviewed in person, they can apply to colleges that won't interview them in person. And if they really do want to be interviewed in person, they can apply to colleges who will interview them in person. So they've got some kind of choice.
And the website will make it very clear and help you as an applicant choose or to make a short list of which colleges that you'd be interested in. So would I be right in thinking that it's a bit of a myth that there's a uniform format to and how to interviewing someone because of all of these other factors that might affect?
Yeah, it depends, I guess, what you mean by sort of uniform. So what we try to do is make sure that whether we're interviewing in person or online, we're discussing the same ideas, the
Yeah.
same topics,
Yeah.
the same theories, the same interpretations, whatever it may be, depending on the subject. But yeah, exactly how that's handled is necessarily slightly different if it's online or in person. Um, but again, that doesn't have a significant impact on the academic assessment that's going on. So that's why we're confident that, as I said earlier, really it makes no difference whether we interview someone in person or online.
So would I be right? Is it because the interviewers and their ability to interview and assess well is the reason why they're able to assess applicants who are doing online interviews in the same way they're assessing applicants who are doing in-person interviews, and the format won't have they won't have any impact on their assessment.
That's right. So I mean, take a subject like maths as an example. So if someone's being interviewed in person for maths, they'll probably be in an environment pretty similar to this. There'd be two interviewers normally, and there'd be one interviewee. And for a maths interview, you'd largely work through some maths problems, as you'd expect. It would be weird if you discuss political things in a maths interview. And so one of the interviewers might write down an equation on a piece of paper, or they might have printed in advance an equation on a piece of paper, and they'd pass it to the applicant over the table. And then the applicant starts working their way through it, and the interviewers are looking at what they're doing. And if the interviewers see that the applicant's gone astray, they've started trying to, I don't know, use some technique that isn't relevant for that particular equation, then they might say, are you sure about that? And do you want to think about this again? So they'd help them through it, and that would all be done on a piece of paper, usually with a pen, at a table like this. If the same interview is taking place online, there's no table because it's online. There's no pen really because it's online. So what would most likely happen in that situation is they would screen share a whiteboard. And again, they might have pre-prepared the questions, or they might write them there and then. So you'd see the equation on the whiteboard in the Zoom room, or whichever platform is being used. And then the applicant would either be able to write if they've got a stylus and some sort of device like an iPad, or if not, they could type. So you can type using the usual maths keyboard shortcut sort of shorthand symbols. So the same discussion about the same equation, just to take that example, could take place, but how it's actually handled is different, because you can do different things in person to online, but the intellectual issues that are being assessed are identical, regardless of whether it's a piece of paper and a pen, or whether it's a whiteboard and a stylus.
So with regards to the tech, and I know from my experiences of doing supervisions during the lockdown and supervisions in person, they were just the same. They were just raised. I mean, I didn't notice a difference, if that's worth anything for the applicants. But one thing I can imagine a student being worried about is if they have the right tech for the interview, if they have like a good enough tablet or good enough stylus. If someone's in that position where they're worried about if their tech's good enough, is there anything that they can do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my advice would be to contact the college that's assessing their application. We're well aware that not all applicants have access to the same technology, basically. And we don't want someone to be at a disadvantage simply for that, because, whether you have the latest iPad or not doesn't indicate anything about your intellectual ability. Right? So what I would suggest is getting in contact with the college, assessing the application to find out what they would like you to be able to access in an ideal world. You might then want to have a chat with the relevant people at your school to see whether your school can provide you with, like an iPad and a stylus or whatever it may be. If the school isn't able to help, and again, we understand that some schools just won't be able to help with that, it may well be that the college itself is willing to provide some of the technology it would like you to have. If it's just like sending you a stylus or something like that, you might have a phone or an iPad that you can use, but you haven't got a stylus. They may well be willing to provide that. So I think just be willing to raise that with them so that you know what the expectation is. But as I say, that the broad kind of headline message is that we want to make sure that no one's at a disadvantage because they don't have access to the same kind of technology as perhaps more privileged applicants.
Yeah, exactly. So we've gone through how in a more science-based interview in person, you might be writing things on pen and paper. Online, it might be on a tablet with a stylus. For the more humanities subjects interviews, are there any logistical differences compared to online and in person?
Slightly, yeah. There are a few. For a lot of the arts and humanities subjects, they tend to be a little bit more conversation based on the whole. So if you're applying for subjects like history, or if you're applying for subjects like English literature, then yeah, a lot of it will be discussion based. Probably questions arising from your personal statement, things like that. So, talking to someone in person or talking to someone using a platform like Zoom or something. I mean, yeah, as I said before, there might be some technical things, like if your mic isn't working particularly well, that can create a few problems. But assuming the technology is working pretty well, it makes very little difference there. It's just the interviewer's asking questions and you answering them, and that can happen in either format. For some interviews, for those kinds of arts and humanities subjects, you might be given a text to have a look at, either before the interview or in some cases during the interview. And again, the only difference is that rather than having that in hard copy on a piece of paper, it would just be screen shared. It might be a poem to look at, and screen share it so you can read it on the screen. Or if you're sent it in advance, it'd be as a PDF or something, so you look at it. So again, yes, logistically there are slight differences, but none of that has any bearing on the intellectual content of the discussion. And students seem to be, or applicants seem to be, absolutely fine with those sorts of things online.
Okay, I'm happy you mentioned about the screen sharing, because it sounded like you were going to say, there aren't any differences between an online and in-person interview besides that one's online and one's in person.
that would be tautological.
Your answer was very good. I was like, but then, it has to be said, one is online and one is in person.
Yep.
But I think a lot of people watching will, and we've talked about this, but just want to make it absolutely clear for anyone who's thinking, who might think that the interview will be different. Will the actual interview be different? Will there be different interviewers depending on whether you're doing an interview online or in person, or will the interviewers or questions be the same?
Yeah, I mean, again, different colleges may set it up slightly differently, but I think what most colleges will be trying to do is make sure that the interview teams are pretty much the same, whether it's in person or online. If one of them gets ill or something, they might need to swap in someone else. That sort of stuff happens all the time. But in an ideal world, it would be the same interviewers interviewing everyone who's applied, whether those interviews are in person or online, because again, we want to minimize the extent to which the in-person and online interviews are different. The more they're the same, the easier it is to compare and contrast the applicants fairly. So most colleges will be trying to do that.
And I assume most colleges will be aiming for the questions to be the same, whether it's online or in person.
Again, what often happens, especially for subjects, quite big subjects that interview across multiple days, they might vary the questions across the days. Because in this wonderful age of social media, the interview questions can leak. Not it's not us doing the leaking, it's the people who, I never really understand the sort of thinking behind it, but what sometimes happens is someone's interviewed, as soon as their interview is over, they go onto Insta or they go onto TikTok or something and give detailed information about the questions they were asked. I don't see how that benefits them.
Yeah.
I see how that might benefit all the people who are yet to be interviewed that day.
Yeah.
I don't see how it benefits them. So maybe they're just very altruistic and they just want to give other people a great opportunity. So we know that happens. So what tends to be the case is that interviewers will often try to vary their questions across different days to avoid any leaking of questions.
It's an interesting phenomena to have an interview and then go online to talk about what the interviews happened and what you interview, what the questions were, because no social experiment or psychological experiment, thought experiment would predict that behavior.
No.
Like a prisoner's dilemma.
No.
Like it just defeats all the logic.
That's right.
But it's a real life.
That's right. I mean, my advice is always just don't put anything. I mean, sure, go on Instagram and say, hey, I had my Cambridge interview, blah, fine. Don't give detailed information about the questions, because then you're if you're helping anyone, as I say, you're just helping other people who have applied, because you might be able to let them think a bit in advance about the questions they might be asked that afternoon. So just, you don't need to do that. Like, that's not helping you, so don't do it.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly. And lastly, just wanted to talk about, I think what it's said something that's said quite often, at least informally amongst students, that the interviews are there to be quite similar to Cambridge supervisions, and should that reassure applicants who might find an in-person interview daunting, that it's the interview will be a similar model to the teaching that they'll have for 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I probably said on some of the other podcasts, can't remember now, but the way the interviewers are viewing the interviews is they're seeing them as little teaching opportunities.
Yeah.
So, and that's this thing that we call supervision, which is this small group learning kind of method, I guess, that we use at Cambridge. A typical supervision will last for an hour. There'll be a teacher or a supervisor, and there might be 2 students or supervisees who have prepared some work in advance for it. And then that work gets discussed. So the interviews aren't exactly like that. There are normally 2 interviewers. So if you like 2 teachers, and there's obviously only 1 student, we don't interview 10 people at the same time. It's normally just 1 at a time. So it's not exactly like a supervision. It doesn't last for an hour. The interviews normally last for about 25 minutes to half an hour. And in most cases, the applicants won't have prepared some work in advance. There are some exceptions to that. So people who apply, say, for architecture will have prepared a portfolio, and that is highly likely to be discussed in one of the interviews. So there are some exceptions, but on the whole, the applicants aren't expected to prepare some work specifically in advance of the interviews. So with those sort of differences aside, the core content of it, which is discussing ideas, approaches, methodologies, theories, interpretations, that sort of discussion is pretty much identical to the kind of discussion that would take place in a supervision. And the interviewers are trying to see how teachable, to use that word that gets used maybe too much by some of the interviewers, but they are really trying to see how teachable that person is. And what teachable really means, I think, is how would this person cope in that kind of teaching situation, and would they benefit from it? Would they thrive and flourish in that kind of teaching environment? And that's really what the interviews are trying to sort of probe, in addition to a few other things. So, I mean, maybe for some people that makes it sound even scarier, but hopefully for some people that makes it sound a bit less scary, because you're not expected just to get the right answer all the time. Because in any teaching situation, if you already know the right answer, there's not much to teach you. So, the questions in the interviews will be designed to lead you towards things that you've never really considered before. So you shouldn't feel inadequate if you're in that situation. You should feel as if you're in exactly the right place if you find yourself in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully people will see it, or once they realise that the interview is a collaborative learning exercise. A collaborative learning exercise should be less daunting than an interview.
Yeah.
And it's definitely not a debate or
an interrogation. It's definitely not an interrogation.
No.
Yeah.
No, exactly. And just to show viewers what it looks like from the interviewer's perspective, how do interviewers mark an interview? Like, are there any forms? Do they discuss the interview online? Is there anything written down, etc.?
Absolutely, yeah. So for each interview, we have interview report forms, which is basically you can either do it again as hard copy or as a PDF, however you want to do it. And some of the information on it is already given to you, like the name of the person that you're interviewing and some information about their school and stuff like that. But the main boxes are there to record what was asked during the interview, which questions are asked during the interview. There's another box where you can put some comments about what the interviewee did that was really impressive. There's another box where you can put comments about what the interviewee could have done differently in order to improve their responses. And then there's another box with sort of a general overview of the interview, what went well, what didn't go so well. And then we score it out of 10, with 10 being the best possible score, and 1 being the lowest score. And so, we all the interviewers score each interview separately. And then usually when we're discussing the applicants, we might look at the average interview score, because if everyone gives a 9, then that's someone who's consistently impressed everyone. Whereas if in one interview someone gets, a 2 and a 3, and if in another interview they get a 10 and a 9, then that's someone who's really kind of split the interview, as they've really impressed one team and really failed to convince the other team. So they're the sorts of people we discuss quite extensively. So that's what it looks like from an interviewer's perspective.
And lastly, how many interviews should applicants expect, and how many interviewers do there tend to be? Is it like a room of 10 people, or is it just one person?
It's normally 2 interviewers. Again, some colleges might vary from that a little bit, but it's usually 2 interviewers. And there are normally 2 interviews, and they each last about 25 minutes or so. But again, that's something that should be clear from the college's web pages. So as we said earlier, if you want to apply for a particular course and you've got maybe 3 colleges that you're interested in, you should be able to find those details on their web pages. And if you can't, you can email them in advance and ask them, because again, that may have an impact on which college you choose to apply to.
No, yeah, exactly. I think that's everything. Unless there's anything else.
I think that's it. And just to remind people, we've got some existing podcasts about interviews, and they're as relevant still as when we recorded them, I guess, like sort of 8-9 months ago, 10 months ago, something. So I appreciate that the interviews are part of the process. People quite understandably feel a bit apprehensive about. But I think the more the applicants understand why we do it and what we do during the interviews, the more relaxed hopefully they can be about it. And so we have some podcasts that are specifically about interviews kind of in general, but then on some of the subject specific podcasts, the various fellows based at the college talk about the interviews in relation to their specific subject. So it might be worth looking at those as well.
Yeah. And we've made, on YouTube, we've made playlists for different topics that we do on the podcast. And one of them is a interviews specific playlist. So all of the podcasts that we've done on interviews, you can find them on that playlist.
So just put that on loop and go for a long run, and you'll know everything.
Exactly.
Everything you need to know. You're probably pretty tired. It might need to be a marathon, but you'll know everything there is to know about interviews.
Exactly. Some off the top of my head, some of the subjects that we've done on interviews advice is medicine, law, history, philosophy, then a few others to definitely do, and as well as
natural sciences a bit as well.
Natural sciences, and we've done a lot of general advice, and you'll notice that there's quite a lot of similarities. It's more similarities than differences.
Exactly.
But yeah, thank you for watching. We're going to be doing more podcasts on the admissions rounds and topics that we haven't done so far, and as well as interviewing the remaining subjects we haven't done. So have a look out for that. And if you have any questions about the admissions process, do leave them in the comments. But yeah, we'll see you guys next time. Nice.
I think it was fine.
I think, yeah. Yeah, it's fine. I think it was good for it to be a bit